Right, let's get down to business. When we had the Cat Club in affectionately called my shed, which started in 2011. It wasn't a shed, it was quite a cool garage with all my vinyl in, CDs and videos and what have you. But it was referred to as a shed. There were only eight of us, and we invited this buffoon on my right. And his album, his first album that he selected was this record. And it blew us all away. So I'm sure it's going to, if you've not heard it before, I'm sure it's going to do the same to you. So will you please welcome a friend of us all and a fine gentleman, I have to say, Mr. Chris Madden. And what else can we say? The truly wonderful Helen O'Hara.
I actually I begged to go to that first Cat Club and introduce this record because Gary Guestlist, who was another member of the Cat Club, kept telling me we do this thing on a Tuesday night once a month, and it used to be on a Tuesday, didn't it? It did, yes. And there was only one album that I wanted to bring. I wanted to bring that album. I mean, I've got lots of albums that I really, really love, but this is one that has just constantly stayed with me. It's stayed really close to the turntable. I've got I think 5 or 6 different versions of it. Wow. Someone had told me, I was saying this to you earlier, someone had told me on the 19th of September 1985, when I was sat outside my mum and dad's house because I was locked out because I'd forgot my key, that I'd be sitting here, 57 years old, talking to one of the creators. My mind would have not really been able to have computed it properly, but I'm absolutely delighted to have not only read the book, which is amazing, and we'll get to that later, but to be sat here with someone who... What was your role in creating this album that we're going to listen to? How do you perceive your role now, looking back? It
developed, actually. So initially, we'd just come out of Tour IA, and Kevin had put his dungarees in the bin. I'd followed suit, and that was the end. That was the end of that. It took a while for the album to start because Kevin needed a break, from all the touring and the rigours of what we've been through and everything. I mean, it was all great, but it had been very tiring, everything. And Kevin and me moved in together because we were, going out together, and he'd asked me to live with him. So we moved into this very nice, very posh flat. I'd moved in from my student flat, which was, flapping curtains, 2-bar electric fire. Took me a little while to adjust to that. Kevin wanted to do a lot of decoration. Everything took a lot. He wasn't doing it personally, but it was. Things took a long time. I was feeling actually quite frustrated, really, with the length of time that things were taking, because I just wanted to get on with the music, but he wasn't ready. And also it was that naivety of realising that, Kevin was actually working out what the album was going to be about and what he was going to be writing about, etc. So when we did start writing, it started to sort of fall into place now that, we'd been to Ireland, and I could see that the album was going to be quite political, the experiences that we were having, and that sort of thing. And I think one of the things that I realised that my violin playing was going to be very different was when we were listening to Pennies from Heaven, the Steve Martin version, and on watching the film, and a violin started playing, and Kevin stopped the tape, the video, which we'd got out from across the road, and he listened to it again. He said, "I think that would be great for the next album to play in a sort of bluesy style violin," and that sort of caught me out really, because I was still thinking of 2-IA fiddle sound. And so we taped that violin, and then I started researching blues violin players, and I'd come across Don Sugarcane Harris, I think, who I'd come across years and years ago when I was working with a group in my teenage years, and I remembered his playing, and that he used to play a bit like an electric guitar. So I remembered his playing, and then I tried to research other blues players, and which was quite hard then, because there's no internet or anything like that. You had to go to record shops and look at back of record albums and that sort of thing, and came across Clarence Gatemouth Brown, and anyway, sort of bought these sort of albums I could find Martin Hogan and any blues players I could find. Started studying how they were playing and trying to sort of absorb what they were playing rather than imitate, really. And from there, we just very gradually started to work on, actually, This is What She's Like. That was the first song that we started on, and it was always in the sections. It was always 12 minutes long, approximately. In the 3 sections, and my role then just developed in. I hadn't done much songwriting with Kevin before then. I'd done a little bit on Let's Get This Straight from the Start. But we just sort of, myself, Kevin and Billy Adams, the guitarist, we became the nucleus of the group and met every day, sort of 9 to 5 at the flat, and started writing just very naturally, really. Kevin would obviously write the lyrics and would come up with ideas. He might have a melody, and he'd say, "Can you find some chords for this, Hal?" And I'd work out the chords. And Billy's role was mainly feedback as to, sound good, very honest, good sounding board for Kevin as to what he honestly felt about the ideas that were being chucked about, And it, as I say in the book, it really was like a jigsaw. The whole album was just gradually slotted into place. A lot of experimentation. For example, on This Is What She's Like, we experimented with. Kevin played the first section. It wasn't a sort of straight rhythm. He was pushing some chords a bit naturally when he was playing the guitar, sort of anticipating the beat, if you like. And I suggested that maybe we should use that rhythm as, not we should use that with the drums, not play straight through it, because that seemed to be a very important aspect of the music. And then we decided to try to use a string quartet as well, or a string trio, to try and be the rhythm section instead of using a traditional, guitar. And so I scored out parts for the rhythm, for the strings, and we tried it at the flat, which was, interesting. It didn't really work. What it sounded like, when I think about it now, and what it sounded like now is, I don't know if you know Coldplay's Viva. What is it, Viva? That's the one. Yeah, and it sounds like that. That's got a very rhythmic string part, probably on a synth, but that's how it sort of sounded, really. So it was sort of, it could have worked, but it wasn't quite right for the song. I think that was the thing. So so for example, there was a lot of experimenting, and I became very much because I think particularly because I was living with Kevin, and his creativity was suddenly really became sort of full blown, that I was constantly responding to his creativity. So I was never really off duty, so I was, like Billy could, wave goodbye at 5 o'clock and have the weekends off, but I was always, which was fine for, it was just how it was. But I suppose it was quite an intense time for me, because obviously Kevin was constantly thinking about things, and I was note taking, sort of working things out all the other times as well. So So yeah, songwriting, experimenting, and later I became the musical director of the band. So I was very much involved in auditioning musicians for all sorts of roles. Mainly the drums, trying to find the right drummer, and then often rehearsing the band before Kevin would come to rehearsals, because I could work, sort of direct, get the main things going, rather than him sitting around waiting for the sort of skeleton of the song to be worked on, that sort of thing. So I had a very, very busy role, really, which was constantly changing, constantly sort of becoming more complicated and complex as well. And often that was, management was chaotic too, and so often I would sort of step in to help musicians out with, getting paid and sort of liaising a bit. And so I was wearing lots of hats, really. So it was quite exhausting, I think. And also, when the album came out, I was doing a lot of the promotion as well. So everything really. One thing I will say is that I noticed on the which is correct on the fact sheet, is that on the album it says Kevin and Pete Schweer produced it, but in fact it was myself as well, which Kevin didn't put me on the credits initially. I don't really know why. He doesn't remember why, but previous, later versions, he did put my name on. So because I was very much involved in the mixing and production of it all, really. So yeah, it was great.
That's what comes across in the book, and we're straight into book territory now. I think that's okay to do. What came across was actually what an amazing time it was. And that was a real shock for me to read. So, possibly you are aware of this, that there were a lot of stories that floated around about. Yeah. So I had a mate who signed a major record deal in the 80s, and I remember this engineer coming up to Leeds. My mate was from Leeds, and he was a guy who'd been involved on some sort of mix. Can't remember his name, but he started telling all these stories about nobody was allowed to laugh in the studio. These urban legends that spring up that when the album was complete and he went to New York and it got locked in a filing cabinet and the building burns down. That doesn't come across in the book. It actually comes across that this was a really amazing experience. I know that it was really intense for you because you started to assume these multiple roles, but it sounded...
It's intense, but it was very exciting. Yeah. And, the things I remember most about it is really having lots of laughs as well with Kevin and Billy, when we were writing and in the studio with Alan Stanley, just, really enjoyable. It was... There were lots of myths floating around, and these things happen, don't they? Yeah, but no, it was amazing experience.
Sounds like there was a real striving for perfection, and that seems to come across. Unless I've really misunderstood that, but there was this constant striving to absolutely get it right. So it seemed to be that there were some recordings which were scrapped because some of the musicians who came on board just didn't really get what you were trying to do.
Yeah, I think a lot of it wasn't us being over perfectionist. It was just trying to find. We were trying to find the right musicians for the music, and it was just frustrating when things. It wasn't. All the musicians were great, but it was just a case of getting the right feel, really. Yeah. So for example, we had Woody Woodmansey, a Spider from Mars, playing with us, who was, we all know, he's a brilliant drummer, a brilliant musician, really beautiful person. There, he ticked every box, but he didn't have the right feel for the album. He played on the waltz on one of the tracks, and we thought he'd be right, but he just wasn't. And actually, in later years, when I met up with Woody again, he said, "I totally understand that I wasn't the right drummer," and I just thought that was so lovely that he could see that, and he didn't have a big ego, to sort of be upset about not carrying on with the rest of the album. The same with Crusher, who Kevin and me had seen Crusher play in New York when we'd been to see James Brown, and Etta James was supporting, and both of us kind of looked at each other when Crusher was playing, because it was just like, wow, this guy is amazing. Let's see if he'll play on the album. And he was the first drummer we tried. And again, we got one track with Crusher, which was "Listen to This," and he was absolutely perfect for that. But he might have been right for the whole album. But we'd gone to Montreux for a month to record the first version, if you like, of "Don't Stand Me Down," and there were lots of problems. I don't think it was just Crusher. Kevin and me had just broken up, and we hadn't told anybody, so we were sort of recording this album with a producer, Tom Dowd, who was a legend, who he's worked with, but didn't really add anything to the album apart from being, a really nice person. He was really an engineer. I think that's his main sort of credit. Really, is he's an amazing engineer. But he did suggest that we use a metronome to get the right speeds for each song. So that was, we did learn that from him. But he didn't really suggest anything else. And so there were other things. Vince was having a breakdown. He was suffering. There were all sorts of things. So it might be that Crusher could have been the right drummer, but with all sorts of things going on, it didn't work out. So yeah, we just got one track with him. But then, when we did find the right drummer, who was Tim Dancy, who we'd seen play with Al Green, it was just wonderful when you just suddenly realise you've got somebody who was playing what you were hearing in your head, but you just couldn't find with anybody else. And we literally auditioned, I don't know, 50 drummers, 100 drummers, I don't know. They'd come in to the studio, and Kevin was paying all their expenses, and sometimes they'd start playing, and they were all good, all good drummers, but they'd start playing, and you'd just think, oh, I just know from the first 30 seconds they're not right, but you think, well, they've come all this way, you've got to let them play a couple of songs, and it's not something just being nice, because it's like, it's not easy being when you're auditioning either, so
sure.
So when Tim stepped in, it was just like magic, and that's how it was. When somebody was right, you just knew, like when Vincent Crane started to play, we just knew he was right, but the ones who weren't right, sometimes you just want somebody to be right, don't you? And it's like relationships, isn't it? You really want you want it to work out, but you might know in your heart actually it's not really quite right. And there was pressure on us as well to deliver an album. I mean, we'd had a really successful Touraye, had been massively successful. Yeah. Calvin Eileen had been number one, and all the rest of it. And the record company would, where's the album? But we did refuse to compromise. And I think we were lucky in that it was the 80s when there was a lot of money sloshing around with record companies. Wouldn't happen today.
No.
So we were lucky in that respect. But on the other hand, it wasn't free money.
No, of course, never is.
It wasn't free money. No, but it did enable us to carry on. But yeah, it took a while.
You use that word "feel," and that's brilliant, because this album it is an album of feel. It's a really beautiful piece of art. As you were recording it, and the pressure that you were under because 2RAE had been so commercially successful. When you were recording, did you consider that it wouldn't be the same level of success?
I don't think we thought about success.
Did you not?
We just totally concentrated on the music.
Brilliant.
That never really came into it. The main thing was producing something that we were really, really happy with and we were proud of. And you hope it's going to be successful. You want it to be successful. But we weren't naive in that we knew we were doing something different to everybody else, but it doesn't. But so was 2RAE, really. And I think, if 2RAE hadn't have been successful, hadn't have, Come on Eileen hadn't been played and we hadn't got a hit, people might have said, well, you bring in 3 fiddle players and you wear dungarees, what do you expect? Except that it was successful, you can sort of turn things around, really, can't you? And I just think it wasn't. I think there were a lot of people who Kevin had made quite a lot of enemies. A lot of people in the music press didn't like him. So if somebody had a go, then others felt they could steam in. So there was a lot of people having a go at Kevin because they wanted to, and quite nastily as well. I think people don't like you doing things differently sometimes. They want what's gone before. Where's 2RAE number 2? And because it was so radically different, and also what amongst everything else that was happening at the time, like Phil Collins and Madonna, and it didn't fit. It was all about real instruments and intimacy and it wasn't synths and synthetic sounds and club music. It was, well, as we'll hear later, it's an album you sort of had to really sit down and listen to. It wasn't background music or dance music, or it at the time was very different. It was more like, we knew that when we first started writing, it was more like sort of bands approached albums in the 70s, really, where they looked at an album as a whole, long tracks and lots of, different instruments and no single. That was the plan, not to have a traditional sort of 3-minute single. So when we produced a 12-minute single, that didn't go down well. And then the record company said, well, how about if we split it up? And so we had this sort of, double single, if you like. It had been sort of chopped in half, and that didn't work. It was always 12 minutes long, And in hindsight, we could have released "Listen to This," which was the shortest track and very commercial. But "This Is What She's Like" was the centerpiece of the album. Really, it was. It could have been a single, except that radio doesn't play 12-minute singles. So and nothing's changed really today. If you don't fit Radio 1 now or Radio 2, you won't be played. If you do, you might get Radio 6. BBC Radio 6 might play the sort of indie, slightly, different things. But basically, people, the powers up there want you to conform to what they want to be played. It's very hard to do something different. And we weren't doing it differently for the sake of it. It was just what was happening. It was just what was coming from Kevin, because obviously he was the main creative drive, of the album. And I think, now we've been. It's not a matter of proving right or proving wrong or anything. It's just, I think the fact that it has stood the test of time.
I used to get ribbed for liking this album.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, and so for me, my experience was a personal vindication when it started to get reappraised.
Yeah,
I think somewhere in the 90s it started to get reappraised.
Yeah.
And I'd met Kevin a few times before that, but I did chat to him at probably 97, 98, and told him, you know, it's a brilliant British soul album, and he said, it's not a soul album. And I said, okay, well, that's how it appears to me. How has it been for you to have it reevaluated? You know, as being a really, really huge and key part of the creation of it.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, in the 90s, I was very much removed from music business anyway, because I'd stopped playing and was bringing my family up, and I wasn't paying much attention. And yeah, the album had come out, and Kevin had sent me a copy. And my first thoughts was that second album, if I remember rightly, has got Kevin and Billy on the front.
That's right, yeah.
I was really annoyed about that, because I thought it wasn't an ego thing. You know, if it had been just Kevin, that would have been fine. But that album was very much the three of us. We'd worked with loads of musicians, and everybody was really important, but it was Dexys then was the three of us, and I just felt really upset, you know, that I'd been left off the cover. It was it's a great picture of Kevin and Billy. Really, you know, they've both got the Brooks Brothers suits on, but it wasn't, to me, it wasn't a true representation of that three of us working, and we did work so closely together. You know, we you know, as I say in the book, we'd almost sort of separated ourselves from society, really. We'd sort of, you know, we just really like this very tight unit, and so that was one of my first things, and also that a sound enhancer had been used, which Kevin hadn't realised at the time until it was too late and the album was out, and that had altered the sound a little bit, so he was unhappy about that. So in some ways it was a bit of a disappointment, really, to have released it with that. Although Kevin still stands by the cover, even to this day, even though, you know, we've had a conversation about it recently, and he still thinks that it's fine to have Kevin and Billy, himself and Billy on the front. But that's just, you know, we just see it differently, I suppose, I guess, you know. But the third one, the director's cut, was I was back on the front then. So it was the three of us back on the. But and also Kevin had credited me with production as well, which I was really pleased about. But what I didn't like about that album is that there were two extra tracks put on it. One was The Way You Look Tonight, which we'd recorded when we were trying out different producers, and we tried out Jimmy Miller, who worked with the Stones, you know, and that song just came about through some of the guys were jamming in a sort of break, you know, playing standard songs, and the thing with Dexys was that, you know, you didn't jam, you know, you didn't. It was very much like, actually, a sort of classical orchestra in that, and it was part of my training as well, which is one of the reasons I really related to Dexys, is that they operated very much like classical musicians in that, you know, if you weren't playing because you were meant to be rehearsing, you didn't play. You know, you didn't twiddle around or jam or that sort of thing. You just tuned up and then sort of waited for the conductor, like, which was Kevin, or myself when I was MD. But anyway, what had happened in this session is that some of the group had broken the rule and were jamming, and Kevin came into the room, and everybody's faces were like, you know, we've been caught. The jamming, and he just picked up his guitar and he said, "Oh, does anybody know The Way You Look Tonight?" And it was like, oh, you know, and we all did, and we just rehearsed it a couple of times, and Jimmy recorded it and quickly mixed it, and it's a, you know, really sweet, beautiful version, and that. But Kevin put it on the album. And he also put another song called Kevin Rowland's 13th Time on the album, which originally we had thought about putting on the original Don't Stand Me Down, but decided against it. And we had a rough version that we'd tried with another producer called John Porter, and again it was very roughly done. It wasn't the parts weren't arranged particularly well. I wasn't happy with it, and anyway, it found its way onto the album, and that's why this version for me is the only version actually that I'm happy with. I don't like the other versions, for the reasons I've said. I think they take away from what there's something very special about this album we're going to hear tonight, in that it works completely, and I think having these other two tracks has diluted it or just interfered with it. They're great songs, but I think they perhaps could have been on an EP or something. So yeah, I'm really pleased that it's got the recognition now, and people are discovering it and love it, and we young people are discovering it and loving it as well. So it's really holding out. But I would always say this is the version to listen to.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah. It's a peerless record. There isn't another record that came out of the 80s that is like this album. It is utterly unique. Thank you for creating this, because it has had such a profound effect musically upon me, and it holds a really special place in my life and the things that I listen to, and it almost certainly influenced the things that I listened, which came out not so soon after, but within a few years, which I still hold as real templates for what I really love and enjoy listening to now. And as I said earlier, it's never been off the shelf next to my record player.
Well, I've got, I'm not one for displaying Dexys memorabilia around my flat, but I have got a picture of. We thought it was considered as the cover. It was a picture taken by Kim Knott, who took this album cover, and he's actually he certainly was a fashion photographer. He's like for models and Vogue and stuff. So he's got a great eye, for photography of people. And he took a great picture of you might have seen it, of the three of us, Kevin, me and Billy, on Madison Avenue.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
And it's slightly at an angle, and it's a black and white picture, and we were all wearing coats and stuff, and it's Kim said that should be the album cover, and it could have been. I'm actually glad this one is, though, because I think it's got some peculiar sort of.
You're right. It's a really peculiar cover.
Yeah, it's slightly unsettling. It's a bit Victorian. It's a bit stiff, isn't it? Whereas the other one is just a great shot.
Yeah.
It's just a great picture. And what I've done is I've got that blown up and I have that on my wall because this album is like the same for you. It's I listen to it still. I still listen to it.
Me too.
Yeah, yeah.
And that cover does not tell you anything about what is to come
no,
at all.
No, and that's the slightly confusing thing, isn't it? The clothes we're wearing and everything. I mean, if you like the Touraye cover,
it's all right.
Well, but there's a sense of a bit Celtic. There's
you kind of know, don't you? You've got an inkling.
There's no surprises.
Yeah.
Whereas that and the music, yeah.
We were talking earlier about what I do. I'm a therapist, psychotherapist, and we were talking about the things that when you listen to music, for example, one of the things that memories emerge.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I was thinking yesterday about coming here today, one of the memories that emerged was listening to this album for the first time, and there was something there. I couldn't genuinely make sense of it. It didn't take me long to make sense of it, because I listened to it 4 times that day.
Wow.
And when I finished the 4th listen, it was just like I'm listening to something that I've really not heard the like of before.
But I think I felt a bit like that when we were writing it sometimes. When, for example, the first track on this is The Occasional Flicker, and hearing Kevin playing the first verse just on an acoustic guitar, and the chords are. It was just that thing of that's just very different. You know,
Yeah.
there was definitely an atmosphere.
Yeah.
You know, that was the thing. You know, and that happened a lot throughout the album. Of you're just like, wow, you know, this is, you know.
But whatever you were channeling, it's something really magical.
Great.
Let's listen to it.
Please, a round of applause for Chris and Helen. Thank you.
Right, are we all ready for a listening experience?
During this record, there's quite a bit of talking, and that's the only talking there's going to be in this room tonight. Is this talking on the record? So you've been warned. So listen to the record, enjoy it. It's a trip.